Because you cannot actually find like exact truth. You can like maybe find some, because everything is good and bad depending on the individual.
What science taught people, for example, is that it would be wrong and detrimental and harmful for you to round your spine, which is completely natural articulation that people have again been doing thousands of years, hundreds of years. There's often the connotation that this science is like the highest authority, and it is kind of, it cannot be flawed. It's almost like if you measure something with these scientific devices and everything, then you have this like almost absolute truth that you present to people. Like if I were to take my elbow and just the bone here and the upper arm, the lower arm, and I start to move it like this way, just the bone, think about it, like 10,000 times. Would I not cause some wear and tear in the joint? You don't see us too often citing like scientific studies. Like, if we bring some new training, we don't immediately show you a study for it, or we don't always keep referencing the studies or bringing out new studies. And there are like reasons for this. And I believe that we are very scientific in our approach, like we have a scientific method, but we are not limited by science. We are not completely based on it. And the problem here is that I think that the scientific studies in general and the exercise science it has a lot of problems. And when there are people who, quote unquote, call themselves as science-based, there's often the connotation that this science is like the highest authority, and it cannot be flawed. It's almost like if you measure something with these scientific devices and everything, then you have this like almost absolute like truth that you present to people, and people take it often in that manner. Like it gives you this additional authority, whereas the reality of these studies, and not just even in exercise science, but especially when it comes to these training studies, the reality is that they are very inaccurate. There's a lot of room for errors. There's tons of variables that you cannot even take into account. Like you cannot take often account the person's like personal individual skill level, what kind of training background he has, what kind of mind-muscle connection is he using, for example, these kind of variables. They're very hard to quantify, and then if any of these variables change, you will change the results of these studies completely. Like, and not just, this is not just me talking about this. There's people who are even much more knowledgeable about the studies and how they're conducted, and talk about these different errors that can occur there. So we need to understand that science, when it comes to these studies, it is useful. I believe that it can give a great additional information. It can give a lot of supportive evidence. For example, our methods and training can be backed up by some of the studies, and they can appear later, for example, so they can give a good supportive evidence. But the science of these studies should never be the authority figure. And actually, what I think happens oftentimes when people bring out these studies, they take away from the physical autonomy of an individual. They are like saying like, hey, look, this is the paper. Like, what we follow this paper, you should do things that they are in this paper. Whereas in reality, I believe that whatever the paper says, it may not work for you, and you never have to follow what the paper says. And it, like in any case, maybe, perhaps you can try it. And that's what it's made for. It's made for you to then try it and later verify it through your own body, like this, whether it works or whether it doesn't work.
Yes, actually, if you look at the mainstream fitness and the discussion, almost everything that is not directly backed by peer-reviewed studies, they are often called Broscience, and they are all these guys who actually base their methods on experience and results. They are actually called Broscience if they cannot find the exact study to support their way of training. But these people don't realize that this whole thing about science-backed training methods and so on, it's actually quite new phenomenon, because all of these old school guys for hundreds of years, and even only like 50 years ago, they never read any studies when they were training. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger, I don't think he ever read any studies. Instead, he was learning from mentors, he was learning from masters before him, and of course experiencing a lot by himself and all his like friends and training partners. So they were actually, of course, everyone who really gets good results and reaches a high level, they have to be results based, because you cannot just just walk in the woods and get lost and not get like any kind of results. But that's not one thing. And if you look at any science in the past, like even Sigmund Freud from psychology, he didn't really he didn't base anything on science. He didn't base anything on scientific studies. Instead, he based everything on the study he was himself doing in the moment. Like he was studying the subjects, and he was creating the whole field of psychology. And likewise, even Albert Einstein, he was really basing a lot of his research on his own research. Like, because if you base everything on like peer-reviewed studies, you're always living in the past, because they're kind of like an image of the past, what has worked before, but they don't really show they don't give you any progress in regards to anything. They only show you what has worked before. And even like Eero said, even in these cases, it's just data, which may or may not be accurate. It depends on the scientists who are doing the study, and it depends on also how good these scientists are. Because me and Eero, we both come from the academic background. I have a university degree, and we know not everyone is like the sharpest like tool in the shed or something like this. Like there's like lots of different guys who like just make studies just for like profession, and they don't really understand anything what they're doing. And likewise, I don't know if people are aware of this, but if you look at the current science, there's like a crisis going on. It's called like replication crisis. And in replication crisis, they have found that very small percentage of studies are actually replicable. Like they cannot replicate most studies at all. Only in like natural sciences, like mathematics and physics, they can actually replicate the study. But if you look at psychology, social sciences, even exercise science, they cannot replicate the study they did in the past. And everyone actually knows this, because if you look at even nutrition, every month they have a study, coconut is good for you, and the next month coconut is bad for you. And
eggs are bad.
Eggs are good, eggs are bad, because you cannot actually find like exact truth. You can like maybe find like some, because everything is good and bad depending on the individual, depending on the circumstances, and depending on so many different factors. So you cannot even like define and confine the truth in just one, or even like a host of different studies. And I would say if they were to like replicate most studies in exercise science, they would get different results every time, depending on the people who are doing the study and the people they are studying. So that's why, like Eero said, it's good to use the studies and scientific, and it's a necessity to be scientific and results based. But this entire focus and reliance on scientific studies which are peer reviewed, it's a limitation, and it's a hindrance, and it's also something that often takes you in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I think that the evidence should always go like before the scientific studies. Like if a scientific, I mean, this is my own experience why I even started to go away from the studies, because as someone mentioned, we were academic types. We were both studying university, and like a lot of like mathematics, physics, chemistry, everything. Like we have been studying this. And when I went to training, of course, I started first. I read articles, I read studies, and and books, exercise books, because that I didn't have any other knowledge. So you go for the books, you want to get some additional knowledge. And even with the pains that I had in my body, I tried to search like these texts and everything, like what related to back pain, what causes it, and everything. And my experience was that I did first try to follow these things, but what I noticed is that whatever the study said, I still need it. It could be that I tried, for example, okay, take an example. A study says that you do an exercise that grows your muscle. Like, let's say it grows your back muscles, your lats. You find a study that it has been studied with these electrodes putting into your back, and it says like this gives a good stimulus to your back muscles. And then I go to the gym and I try to replicate that. I try to do it myself, and I may not get any results from it. So actually these studies, whatever they said, it did not correspond with the reality of me doing it, because the studies are never independent of the person who does them. Like someone mentioned, if you change the persons who are in the study, it changes the results. And this is what I mentioned at the beginning, that there are these variables. And if you change any of these variables, the results can change completely. So what a study says, it can be completely dependent on the training skill level of the individual, on the training background of the individual, and all the individual elements of what you have, like this personal like training level. So I started to notice that really like these studies, I was more like study-based at a point in my life, but I noticed that it did not really produce the results in my body always. Even though the study or the paper said whatever it said, it's like ultimately it didn't matter. And I also realized the same thing that Samuli said, okay, hundreds of years, like the 1900s bodybuilders, like who had amazing physiques, built their bodies. They never read a single study, but it was truly of this accumulation. Like this is the scientific method, especially if we go to even the Qigong. Like I think Jiang Shan mentioned that the Shaolin Temples, those were like universities. They were like Kung Fu universities, which I would say that they are training universities. It was just these ancient methods that they were utilizing. So for millennia, they are practicing these different methods, and they are transmitting those methods to other people. And during every generation, they refine those methods. And how do they do this? They base it on the observation of their own bodies. They base it on the observation of the results that this create. And this is like the scientific method that I think you should give probably the most amount of, let's say, authority. That is the observation and the results, because that's what you ultimately want. And then the studies, they may come later or afterwards or whatever. But the problem is also that with these people, they can use these studies now to kind of support almost anything. Like, because another thing that Samuli mentioned, like you mentioned, is that it's not only the people who are in the study doing the training, but it's the people who designed the study. That's also one thing. And then we have the people who interpret the study. So we have professionals who can perhaps interpret the study and like really as it is, like they can really find the real meaning of the study. They can analyze how it was really done, and they can see like if it's really good, whether it's peer-reviewed or not, whether like it's actually reliable result. But we have a host of trainers and people who they just take the study like it's plain, like they just take the results like, okay, here's the results, and this is what it says, and this is how the thing is. Like they had no way of really interpreting what the study actually says. And then they take it and they misrepresent the study to the people. And this, as you said, I think it really can limit what people are actually doing.
And this is actually extremely common in supplements industry, because all these guys who are trying to sell you supplements, like take this vitamin, take this whatever mineral supplement or something like this, they always cite, they just, take in stock some supplement, and then they just try to cherry pick the exact studies that support the supplement, and then they try to sell it. And you also have to consider that many of these studies that have been produced have been like produced by the companies who actually sell these supplements. So it's not even like biased. It's not even like non-biased knowledge. It's actually very biased. And if you look at, Eero mentioned the Shaolin University for millennium, we also have to consider that when we talk about the scientific method and the peer-reviewed studies, we actually everyone kind of talks about Western science. It's because it's actually Western science. Of course, nowadays it's everywhere, but it's actually the Western way of like thinking, Western way of like
conceptualizing the world.
Yeah, it's the Western framework for understanding anything. But all this time, throughout history in different cultures and different like continents and everywhere, people have created amazing forms of art, amazing form of science without having access to this Western way of science at all. And likewise, if you look at the past 100 years, all these different art forms, from different martial arts to dance to ballet to gymnastics, and like this, all of this developed without basing anything on the peer-reviewed studies. Only in the last 20-30 years, everything has become more and more focused on peer-reviewed studies in exercise science. Like somehow all these different forms of human movement, like boxing and sports, they never relied on studies. But somehow exercise science and training and bodybuilding and gym culture in general has become not completely, but very heavily like focused on the scientific studies. But if you look at the best coaches in the world, whether it's boxing, football or anything, they of course they can say, yeah, this is based on scientific studies and here's the study that supports what I do, but they didn't actually develop their ways of training and methods basing their method on the studies. Instead, they were just, trying to find the best way to produce results, and over time, over years, they just repeated it over and over again until they developed the method that actually works and actually produces the best results. And it was all based on experience and results. It was not based on peer-reviewed studies. But somehow we like to think that everything has to be peer-reviewed, and exercise is all science when we consider it more like a art form, like sports or boxing or ballet or qigong or anything.
Yeah, and this is what I said already, like about because what we are trying to do, we're trying to like, sounds maybe odd, but we're trying to like empower the individual. Like everything, if I bring science to the table, or if I bring a study, or if I try to talk about anatomy or something like detailed about the human body and how it's constructed, I'm always trying to give like more power to you and take away fear, actually. So the way I see it, many people, when they present, for example, this is one of my, for example, clients was worried about rounding his spine. There was not even load or very lightweight, and if you round your spine and then bring it back like a Jefferson curl exercise. So people have been conditioned, and this is directly from science. Like this is what science taught people, for example, is that it would be wrong and detrimental and harmful for you to round your spine, which is completely natural articulation that people have again been doing thousands of years, hundreds of years. And even in the early 19th century, you can see a lot of these bodybuilders did all the bent over rows, they did round back deadlifts, they did everything round back, and then even nowadays you can see people like doing round back lifts and everything, and it doesn't correlate to more back pain.
And in qigong, there's also like the squatting monkey with round back and lots of different movements and stances.
That's a good point. In qigong, actually, we have even the lesson on the squatting monkey, which Cheng Yushen teaches. Like you spend minutes and minutes in these round back postures, and they had no concept of this dangerous flexing of the spine, but it has been brought with. This is the science, even the study where they are either they're human cadavers or they may be pig spine cadavers, and what you have is just a spine. So you're bending this spine like this way without muscles, without control, without the tendons, without the ligaments or the fascia or anything protected there. You're just bending this spine. Like I have here, the spine. You have the skeleton of the spine, and then you start to bend it like this way, and then you do it thousands of repetitions, and then you get some wear and tear and some dysbulging. Like if I were to take my elbow and just the bone here, and the upper arm, the lower arm, and I start to move it like this way, just the bone, think about it, like 10,000 times, would I not cause some wear and tear in the joint? Probably yes. Like you could probably replicate damage to any joint of your body if you just took the skeleton as an isolated unit, independent unit, started to like rake it around like this way, I'm sure you would like break any joint of your body. And that's the problem. Like if people bring like some anatomical models like this way, and then they can make a very compelling case for it. For example, they just like showing, okay, if I bend this and I add like this compressional force, and then I start to round and flex, and then look what happens to the intervertebral discs there. Look what happens. Look, it bulges. But you're not showing the actual human body. This does not, like this what I have here, this spine, it does not exist except as a model. In the human body, this doesn't exist as an independent unit. What you have is the skeleton. You have your multifidus, you have your erector spina, you have your internal or external obliques, you have your quadratus lumborum, you have your diaphragm, you have your transversus abdominis, you have a thing that cannot be separated. If you want to look at really the function and the durability of the spine, you cannot just bend like this mere skeleton and try to showcase something out of reality, because in your human body, in there, it is not like that. It doesn't work like that. So yes, it can be useful, of course, to demonstrate if there is the pathology, how it maybe has occurred and so on. But the problem here is that when people bring this out, and what I started is that people spread fear. They spread fear with these kind of scientific models, and they take away from your personal responsibility and from your personal powers, because you have the power to make any exercise safe or harmful. And this does not just relate to the flexing of the spine or rounding of the spine. So what I actually believe that as a person, steps into this journey of trying to become a physically like autonomous, autonomous individual, maybe like this. So there's like two phases. One is the fear phase, and you actually have to be fearful at some point. And I went through this. I started to be like fearful in the sense that you recognize that every single exercise can be potentially harmful if you are completely just disregarding the control, disregarding mind-muscle connection, disregarding good posture. Every exercise that you're doing, it doesn't matter which is like whether you do your overhead press arms wide or arms narrow, or you do your push-up with your shoulders retracted or shoulders protected. It does not matter what you're doing. Every exercise can be harmful, detrimental, and you need to face this reality and you need to face this fear, because that fear creates a certain carefulness in your body. It creates a compulsive or requirement for you to be very mindful of what you are actually doing during the training. You have to face this reality. That's just the first point. First is this fear. The second point is the trust that comes with taking better care of your body. Now you start to really recognize your body. You start to understand it much better, because you have gone through this fear phase. You have gone much through mindful in your approach. You start to develop a very good mapping of the body, like we even talked in one of the earlier podcasts. And based on this, you create trust in your body. And this trust is really, it comes from you. It comes from within in your own abilities. It doesn't come from the paper, because the paper cannot give you this. The paper can only give you some uncertain ideas and images that you then think are the reality, which are not. Same with these skeleton models. You just get outside ideas, paradigms. But this process that you have to go through is internal, through fear into trusting your own body.
Yes, if you look at, because what Eero just described is like the scientific way of seeing and understanding the body is very limited, and it's very narrow, and it's very like from point A to point B, and like it's very narrow. But if you look at nature, if you look at animals, they are very fluid, they're very dynamic, and everything's changing all the time. And reality is actually like that. And human bodies are also like this. And if you look at history, all this from India, like Kalaripayattu, and to China, Shaolin Kung Fu and Shaolin methods, they were very versatile and very dynamic, and they covered lots of different factors. But in comparison to the Western way of training, they are like so much more versatile. And our training methods, like Movement 20XX and Athlete 20XX, are also so much more versatile. and have so much more variability, because they're supposed, like, training is supposed to mimic reality and life. And if you base your training completely on like scientific studies, everything you do becomes extremely limited. And because we have to understand that like everything we know today is actually less than 100 years old. Like even the use of barbells, which is one of the most used training tools, it's only 150 years old. And before Arnold Schwarzenegger and these guys, they were not limited by science either. They were actually experimenting a lot, trying to find different ways. But only in the last 20, 30, 40 years, everything has become limited by not just our own understanding, but also by our own creativity. Like we don't have the creativity anymore. Instead, we think the best way to train is to focus on these 5 exercises, like the big 5. Like everyone talks about the big 5 all the time, like the back squat and the deadlift and the barbell row and maybe pull-ups, and like just focus on these exercises and you get the results you're looking for. But reality is not like this. Human body is not like this, and athleticism is not like this. Because in the previous podcast, I talked about like I used to focus on these big 5 and big lifts, and I thought I would get athleticism, but I didn't get athleticism, because athleticism is like life. It's very versatile. It's very multidimensional. It's multifaceted, and it has so many moving parts and so many moving components that the only way to develop real athleticism and real human movement and real capability is to actually train like the way you want to move.
Yes, you become like exactly the way you move.
Yes.
But what I find it very interesting also that you mentioned about this modern training, like this is a modern phenomena, and this exercise like back squats and bench press also, they're quite modern. And this is exactly what people, or probably one of the most studied also exercises, like squatting, front squat, back squat. This is what people actually study. And
there's no studies for maze. Oh, at least I haven't.
Yes.
Maybe there's in India there are.
Yeah,
but they are not studying animal movements. They are not studying Shaolin methods. They are not studying like these mazes and claps, and they are mostly focused on the big 5. And then how do they think? They think the truth and the results for the effectiveness for these exercises is also very limited, because then they test like your jumping ability, your sprinting ability, but it's still very limited and confined when it comes to athleticism. Like, because this is the thing, that like real athleticism and real movement, you cannot define it with like 1 parameter or 2 parameters or like attributes, because it's so wide and it's so flexible and so dynamic and so fluid. Like this whole concept of movement and athleticism and capability, it's so vast that you cannot even measure it. Like if you try to put measurements and like definitions for what is good athleticism, you are kind of like already limiting your like
almost like destroying the athleticism itself.
Yes, if you focus on too much on the indicators of.
Yeah, and I think maybe like one reason that even these back squats are, for example, or very like this one-dimensional exercises are studied so much is because they can be somewhat quantified and studied. If you try to conduct a study on swinging a maze, or you conducted the study on let's say lizard crawl, it's going to be quite difficult to put that into a box, because in science you have to, if you want to conduct a study, you have to put things into boxes that you can control. Right? And that already is like out of the nature of the body, actually, like you explained. It's so complex. There's so many different things that are happening there. The athleticism is so versatile that measuring your athleticism with just like a broad jump is impossible, because, well, it depends on the sport. If your sport is jumping forward or like a long jump or something like that, it's more transferable. But we're talking about like overall athleticism that would transfer to like, you know, as wide as possible in regards to martial arts or some ball sports, basketball, football, or even ice hockey, and this way, and all of these movements contain so varied movements that, you know, trying to narrow that and confine that into some kind of ability to squat, it really doesn't make any sense. And this is another thing that the focus on this, the scientific focus on this kind of exercises shifts also the perspective. It has shifted the entire culture around fitness, because the more you study this, the more you give attention to this, and then the more attention they get, the more people start to do these exercises. It's like it shapes the entire reality of what we are doing. So if we were to like actually start to study a lot of these other exercises, they would probably also become much more mainstream. But I think in general, like it just, and even actually in the people who are like proponents of these scientific studies, who read them the most, who are like science based or something like this way, if you look at their training, this one of the most simplistic training that you can often see. Like these should be the guys who are on the top of the training stuff, and then they have these studies, really fine studies and theories, and then you look at in reality what they're doing, and it can be very, very simplistic training, like incredibly simplistic training, because now they have taken the training from the studies and they're too afraid or too uncreative to do any other training than what is peer-reviewed or something like this.
Like if like the big five, if they were the best, absolute best exercises to build athleticism, then the powerlifters would be the best athletes ever. But in most cases, that's not the case. They're actually very bad athletes. Not all of them, but they're very stiff and their whole movement is very limited. So even if you look from that lens, you can already see like something is wrong here.
Yeah, like that's the result or the evidence of.
Yeah, because let's say if somebody focuses a lot on, let's say, gymnastics or focuses a lot on animal movements, the end result of becoming the best at those things is lots of like capability and athleticism. But the same is not the case if you focus on just on bench press. Even, let's say, like recently the Mountain from Game of Thrones, the Thor Björnsson fought Eddie Hall, and to get ready for the fight, like the boxing match, he changed his training altogether, because before he was doing the strongman stuff and the powerlifting stuff like bench press and so on. And what happened is that when he started to get ready for actual athletic sport like boxing, his training shifted from powerlifting to something that looks like CrossFit. And CrossFit is not even like the best way of training, but it's still very versatile. But his whole training shifted from focusing on just maximal strength and the big five to focusing more on cardio, more on the like different types of exercises. And as a result, he actually lost lots of muscle mass. So and when he fought very well in boxing. So even that's like a real practical example of someone that if you want to actually become athletic and become functional, your training has to become more and more towards looking like it's actually athletic and functional.
Yeah, and I think another issue is here that with these studies, you know, a lot of them are focused on like the, for example, hypertrophy, or maybe the maximal strength, right? So you can push as much weight as possible. But like we never look at the body in terms of just hypertrophy or some one rep max. And we have talked about this even before, you know, regards to raising your standards in training. Like you need to look at a lot of other things than just the mere muscle mass. You know, there's a whole lot of aspects. And when we look at the human body, we look at the movement quality. You know, we look at the control that you have. We look at your posture. We look at let's say structural balance. We look at the amount of pain you have in your body. So, and then we can look at, you know, the performance actually, and we can look at the hypertrophy. And those are just like a couple of things within this list. But in these studies, they often focus on measuring what they can measure, which is, for example, you know, you measure like how much, I don't know what device they use, but they measure like the muscle growth, like how much it has growth. But for me, this doesn't, like, based on this, for example, people say, well, actually, according to the studies, you can do like low rep range heavyweight, or you can do high rep range lightweight, and they both produce similar results. Both of them gives you hypertrophy. You get like good equal hypertrophy or something like this. But this gives the sense that, well, it doesn't matter which one I do then. But they're completely different. Like the light weights versus heavy weights, we talk about even this in many occasions, that can be completely different. Like your quality in your training and the joint movement when you're, for example, lifting light weights, it gives you like so much better ability to control your body, so much better ability to create mind-muscle connection, to really target the stimulus, better ability to control your body versus the heavy weights, which doesn't necessarily doesn't give you this ability. And it also, whether you study the hypertrophy, you don't really always, it's hard to separate, is this hypertrophy happening in the biggest muscles, or is it also happening in the smaller stabilizer muscles? Is it happening on the superficial layers or more deeper layers? So based on this, like you get a bit of a wrong idea of the reality of the thing, because the studies, they guide your mind and your focus on certain things, like just focus on hypertrophy, but there are so many different things that you should be focusing on and are probably much more important than the hypertrophy. Like that is, as I mentioned, is only one of the things that actually even we are focusing on our training. It's not the main even thing also, although it happens as a result of training.
Yeah, because over the years, due to lots of mistakes and trial and error and experience, the reason we talk about so much about all these things about health and posture and structural balance and athleticism and functionality and being a little bit dangerous and having, fighting ability, because we have noticed that this is actually the real thing. Like this is where this is what everyone is actually looking for. But everyone thinks like I get the confidence and self-esteem when I get the muscles and when I get like really strong lift, but that's not the case. Like for us and almost no one, it's not the case. Because where the real confidence and real self-esteem actually comes from, it comes from the things we talk about: health, posture, like balance, athleticism, and functionality. Because these are all very primitive and natural things that have always been like important for like 10,000s of years in human history.
Right. No, without any studies or anything.
Yeah, without any study, it has always been important, and these things have always been the most important. Like all these guys focusing on their looks and their muscle size, it's very new phenomenon. It's like only in the past 100 years it has, and only in the last 20, 30 years it has become like everyone, like men are focusing on so much on their appearance and so much on their looks and so much on their muscle growth. But what we have noticed, this doesn't make any man confident. I cannot say for women because I'm not a woman, but for any man, it doesn't make you confident at all. It makes you actually more insecure because it kind of highlights all this, like you become just more self-conscious the more you do it, and the path doesn't lead to anywhere good. But the whole thing about this, the modern way of training, it's very mechanical, it's very limited, and it's very simple. But it also, like Eero has talked about before, it takes power from you. Like it doesn't give you any power, it takes away power. And what I mean is that everything you do has to be like based on someone else's ideas, someone else's, like there's no personal experience, like subjective experience doesn't exist, self-intuition doesn't exist, body awareness doesn't exist. You don't exist. You live and you exist based on these external criteria and external standards and external studies. And likewise, everything happens through external means. Like if you want to build muscle, nowadays everyone says you have to take steroids. Like people don't even believe you can look good naturally. Like everyone, even some guys who look are not even like really massive. They think, yeah, he's on like low dose of testosterone or something. And everyone who's really shredded, they think they're on like clean butterol or some fat burners. When in reality, if you look at Thai fighters, they may not be on anything and they're like shredded to bone because just of their diet and training. And if you look at history, like before steroids were even invented, these guys were massive and they were massively strong as well. So even that, but nowadays, because our own like self-authority has been taken away from us, like our own power has been stolen and it has been given to these outside factors who don't even have your best interest in heart, like this, all these supplement companies, all this, even largely the scientific community, they don't have your best interest in heart always. Instead, this is try to impose their way of like understanding the world on yourself, while taking you out of the equation. Like you don't exist. Your subjective experience, it's Broscience. They laugh at you. Like they laugh at your experience. They laugh at how you live and how you see the world. Like Broscience, it's ridiculed. It's like it's a joke. Like, and if you base anything on your own experience or experience of your mentors or your teachers who have been around for doing the same thing for 50 years and have gotten amazing results based on results, they are ridiculed as well because they don't have the peer-reviewed study exactly supporting their methods.
Yeah, I think it was very powerfully said when you said like they try to make that you literally don't exist. That was like really good summary of what they're trying to do. Like they're trying to completely take you out of the equation and try to take your own like subjective experience away. And what I'm saying, or what we're trying to do, is actually encourage you to really go through this process of trial and error, because that is a scientific process, trial and error. And I think what Bruce Lee said, and we have repeated it many times, absorb what is useful, discard what is not, and that describes the process of self-science. Let's call it like this way: self-science. That is self-knowledge, self-science. That is exactly what it is. You do things, and then you absorb those things that you know this is creating me now benefits. Like this is creating good results based on the evidence that you're doing. This is reducing my tiredness. This gives me better ability to go here and there. It's all subjective, even these feelings, but you can and it can't be measured, but that feeling that you get in your body should be the most important like guiding factor. And then if you notice something, no, this actually makes me much more stiffer, it makes me much more tired, it makes me much more perhaps painful, it increases my pain in the long run, then you're like, let's put that away. Like you have to go through this process, this trial and error, this your own personal scientific process. And this is impossible to do if you are afraid and if you're like scared, like you're scared literally with these studies and with these spinal models, like showing this like bending and like, oh, look, you're gonna break, like like it's insane. Like what I want to show you, like your body is incredible. It can take a lot of stuff, and of all the crazy things that I have experimented with my spine, for example, it has been able to take it all. And I have done some stupid stuff in the past, like with heavy weights and everything, like very stupid stuff. And I had, for example, I was in a pain in a period of time where I was just I was always keeping my back straight. But
like 10 years ago. Yeah,
10 years ago, I was fixated on keeping my back straight because I felt like, oh, well, that's the intuitive thing to do. Like, that's what everyone says. Like you need to be like this way. If you lift a sock from the floor, you need to be like deadlift position, like take it from there. And like that, my back just went worse and worse and worse and worse. And until I got rid of the fear, and I really started to get, not to brace it in this, I don't know what you call, like not trying to lock it in place, but instead start to explore. I started to explore my spine. I started to do this trial and error process. Because if I'm not lifting heavy weights, there's a very small risk for error. There's tiny risk for any kind of injury that you're doing. If you go into your body, you're not obsessed with the weights, you're just exploring the movements that it's capable of doing. And you're doing this repeatedly over and over time. You go through, you test something. Does it work? Does it not? Does it work? Maybe it works. You notice your capacities grow. You notice your movement ranges of motion increase over time. You notice your control increases. You notice your pain start to go away. And this process you can go through by yourself, and or using the knowledge that we offer. But you just need to remember that your body is so capable, it's so strong, and it's so adaptable. And when you're training these different type of even odd movements with your spine, your back gets developed. That is like the rule of training. It's that your body adapts to the resistance you give to it. It adapts to the different movements that you feed to it. That is exactly what we've even been talking about here with Samuli. Your body becomes, how do you say, how you move it.
Yeah. How you train is how you move.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is the reality of the body, is that it is so pliable, it is so movable, it is so versatile. So start to try to imitate that reality of the body until you become that reality of the body. But if you follow the other path, which start to stiffen everything up, and you follow these one-dimensional models, your body will become also that.
Yes.
It become fragile.
Yeah, I will finish with this one thing. Like if you look at the mainstream scientific way of training and so on, their end result is almost always surgery. Like all these guys, they're like injecting stem cells. Like all these guys, they have, like even when they try to train in the scientific way, they still get wrecked. They still get destroyed. And all these big authorities, they are always stuffing, like injecting stem cells in every joint of their body. And then they also having surgeries, and they still defend and protect their way of training. While these same people, many times, especially scientists and the scientific community, they call Qigong, yoga, and all these like ways of training methods that have been around for thousands of years. They call this pseudosciences.
Oh yes, that's the name.
Yeah,
actually.
they call pseudoscience.
It's not Broscience, it's pseudoscience.
Yeah, pseudosciences. And many times these guys don't have any of the same problems as the others do. Like rarely you see yogis and Qigong masters with, back surgeries or something like this. So the proof is in the budding, like they said. Like just look at the results and look at the end result.
And use science as a tool. It's not the authority. It's not final authority. It's just a tool to give you some additional information.
Yeah, like we said, it's just data, which can be useful or cannot be useful. But how we do is that we base our training on results, experience of people who have done it for a very long time. We base it on the masters, grandmasters, teachers, and traditional knowledge that has been around for a very long time. And then we test the knowledge and see what works and what doesn't. And we always see what's individual and what works for the individual and what works for us. Even when it comes to diet and nutrition, there's no consensus of what is actually the best diet for human being. Like all these guys are defending veganism, carnivore diet, and they have hundreds, if not thousands, of research and studies backing everything they do. Like for vegan diets, you have studies that show that it's the perfect diet, but we know nothing is perfect except everything that only what is real is that it always changes.